Alright, so we're running a little behind on this past weekend, but that has a lot to do with the fact that there were so many releases kind of all at once. 4 in theaters and 2 on Netflix, at least as far as major ones go. And we hit all of those except Downhill, which from the looks of the box office, pretty much everybody else made the same call apparently. But we'll get to that eventually, I'm sure. But let's go through these and start with Sonic the Hedgehog, which is a movie that would have sounded like probably a terrible idea, but we did just have Detective Pikachu, which I kind of liked. But in this particular case, I had kind of more of a history, but also not really. Because as far as like the first 2 Sonic games go, I did grow up with those, especially, I probably still, pushing 30, know the levels of Sonic 2, like the back of my hand still, but I never really went beyond that. I'm pretty sure there was like an animated series and there were other games after that, but yeah, apart from like those 2, that's about the extent of my knowledge goes. I just happen to know those 2 things really well, so this was an interesting thing to go into based on that. And thinking about it, especially in the second game, all of the really cool and different levels would seem like, I feel like there's a really interesting movie adaptation to be made here, which of course you always have to be cautious in regards to video game movies and their execution. But here, it feels like you had a lot of options, but I can get maybe going a simpler route. The trouble is that simpler route being the shit that we've seen so many times before, even up to and including the recent Detective Pikachu, where you take the animated character from the game and you put them in the real world with a live-action character, and then it does that. And it's, like I said, I can get it to an extent, but at the same time, you have all this possible creativity with this whole setup and all the different worlds, and you go with the option that requires the least amount of creativity possible. You just put in with James Marsden and you go from there. And and obviously, it's been pointed out numerous times ever since the first advertisement started coming out that Marsden's pretty much already been in this territory with Hop. There's even similar shots when they're in a car together, and it's like, of course, not only is it the teaming the animated character up with the live-action character that may or may not be kind of bumbling or have a messy home life, whatever the hell it is, whatever conflicts they want to throw in there that we've seen a billion times before, but we're also going the road trip route again. Where it is him stuck in a car with Sonic being overly talky and annoying and all that other shit. So that's kind of the issue where it's like, in a way you can see why they would go with it, but then at the same time you're constantly asking, but did you have to go that safe and that uncreative and go the same routes we've seen before, where eventually it's going to get all sentimental, and it turns out all Sonic really wants is a friend, and it turns out he needs something like Sonic in his life, or some shit like that. He's got a dog, he's fine. But, so obviously the thing that's going to really bring this to life, of course, and I think kind of a lot of people figured this going in, and that's Carrey doing Dr. Robotnik, Jim Carrey playing Dr. Robotnik, and the thing about that is, I remember as soon as that casting choice was announced, it was like, there is absolutely positively no in between. This is either going to be one of the worst things ever, this is going to be like Cats level, or it's going to be amazing. And thankfully, Carrey was able to bring the amazing, like his best qualities from the 90s and put it in this character. So, I think I've heard some complaints where people think he's retreading the same territory he's done before, but I think that's been gone long enough to where he's gone in all these sort of different directions with his career and tried different things out, that to see that make a comeback, it feels refreshing again. And to see that this late into his career now, that he can still pull that out and still make it work, is something that everybody wanted to succeed. And you could say maybe that's swaying people's opinions, but I think it genuinely does work for the most part. He even gets like some like genuinely good lines. Like I loved towards the end when he says, "Confidence is a full substitute for intelligence" or something like that. And it's like it just every like he's this goofy over the top character, but then sometimes he'll just say that, and it's in line with like the arrogance of his character, but at the same time it's like it still works in its own right, weirdly enough. And yeah, but in between all of this, of course, it is. I mean, every now and then there is an action scene that only goes so far, and um, and they sort of try to play with the whole contrast of the downplayed life of Green Hills, of course it's called, versus Sonic's vibrant, all over the place nature. And especially in these opening scenes, when it's like I said, it still feels like retread territory of this stuff where we get the combined live action animation. I've been trying to not bring up the Smurfs movies with Neil Patrick Harris, but but eventually it's inevitable. Sonic is never as bad as those by any means whatsoever, but that they're comparable in a way I think still says something. So there is that, and we're stuck with stuff like usually I don't get all bent out of shape about product placement. And it's like I almost think it's more distracting when you get like substitute product placement. But there are a couple of scenes in this movie that genuinely feel like commercials, to where it's really weird. There was the Zillow thing where she was looking at houses for them, and when she says Zillow, it cuts to their laptop open to like Zillow's homepage, and it's just really bizarre. Like in another movie, I would almost think they were playing it up as a joke, like the product placement scene in Wayne's World, but I don't think that's where Sonic's at. So, and then there's the Olive Garden thing, where once again, they're on the phone and she mentions Olive Garden, and he says Olive Garden's tagline, and it feels like in the moment it feels like, oh, that's just his character, or it's a joke between them or something. I was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt, but then the Olive Garden thing inevitably came back, which which I naively brushed off the first time around. But yes, of course that's gonna come back, and of course we're gonna basically get another Olive Garden commercial. But those are the only two I remember. But I feel like it felt more prominent than it probably should have. So there was that, and then we get a lot of stuff like, because you hear about the CGI thing and the way they changed Sonic's design, and it's like, oh, they want to please the fans, good for them. But then there's also the whole pandering thing that I hate so much, the Ryan Reynolds school of pandering that this movie went to. There's some stuff I didn't recognize but heard about later, like I guess there's like memes or something, but. One that stood out was when Sonic's going around the town before anybody knows that he's there, and he just kind of, tries to live a life vicariously through these people, even though they don't know he's there. So he'll sit outside the window and watch the TV when they have it on, or when they have movie nights or whatever. And he's like, "Oh, what's the movie tonight?" And it's Speed. And it's like, well, number one, it's funny in itself that it's Speed. Without even taking into account the Sonic pun or reference, whatever you want to call it. But then it goes into this whole Keanu praising thing, and then it's like, it's just blatant pandering that really doesn't, I don't know. I'm really afraid the internet's going to ruin Keanu Reeves, and that would be terrible, but, here we are. And so we also have stuff that's familiar, but at the same time, I don't know what I would do to change it. Because obviously there's going to be scenes where Sonic is going incredibly fast to the point that it turns into the Quicksilver scenes from the X-Men movies, where everything stops and it's just him moving. And it's like, yeah, you can say, oh, they're basically taking the Quicksilver scenes in the X-Men movies. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know how else you would execute that. So it's like I kind of just give them the benefit of the doubt there, where it's like, that's, like I said, I wouldn't be able to offer another suggestion. So because you've got to portray that in some way in the movie, and that's really just the best way you can do that. So you basically just have to do the same technique, but make it your own without making people remember the Quicksilver thing. But I was remembering the Quicksilver thing, so there's that. Um, and of course, there's pop culture references everywhere. Like I said, some stuff that I didn't get, but I could just sense were pop culture references. So there was stuff like doing that dance thing. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like it's one thing that he did at once, and you're like, oh, there's a pop culture reference that probably won't last too much longer, and then he did it twice, and then it's like, okay, it's one thing to do the thing, but to do the thing twice, you're really setting yourself up to fail in the future. But whatever. We also get cliche stuff like it starts at the ending and he's being chased from Robotnik, and then it pauses, and he says, "I'll bet you're wondering how I got here." That's actually, once again, I don't think there's a self-aware thing here. I think it's, and this is a movie that you would think, with some of the jokes in it and the way it sets itself up. Like I said, the fact that we even have a watchable product because they went back and changed something due to the feedback. You would totally expect, a full-on, almost meta nature to the whole thing. But I'm pretty sure like all the cliches in it and the stuff that's been done over and over again, none of it is done in like a tongue-in-cheek way. It's all this is the thing. This is what they went for. This is the approach they took. So there's a lot of combating things here where it's like there's a lot of stuff that genuinely works. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't. There's a lot of stuff that works because you want it to work, but then there's a lot of stuff you want to work that just can't get there, and So, well, another one of the cliches is there is a scene of Marsden giving like a full-on, talk, something that's going to be him changing career path, and it's a big deal for him, but it's the shot where it's really close on him, and he's giving a big speech, and you know that it's going to be, he's not talking to who or what we think he's talking to. In this particular case, it's a donut wearing sunglasses. That's what the movie is. But I kind of just glossed over this, but it still is worth noting how, and some people may say that it's going to get away with a lot of stuff because of this. There's a lot of goodwill towards it. The fact that they did release a trailer, especially pretty much, I feel like around the same time the Cats thing was happening, where they put out the first trailer, and I guess I only saw like stills of it, but Sonic's design was just really fucking weird, and he looked kind of creepy, and he had like weird teeth or whatever, and I think even the posters, like people just thought his body was weird, and when you think about the fact that there's actually scenes in the movie where he's like lurking outside windows, that's like maybe that would have been less playful than it actually turned out, but the thing is there's still something to be admired about like that gesture, and you could say it was for the sake of money, because it was like, they put that design out and they put that trailer out and people were like, oh my god, what the fuck. So it's like, alright, well, we don't want to lose money, we don't want this movie to fail, so we'll change it and do what they want so that we can, make the money that they are making right now. But I do think there's like an actual, because there's a lot of cases, as we've seen recently, where studios just won't bother with that. They automatically think that they're right and everybody else is wrong, so they'll just put it out there, and they ultimately fail. That's how we end up with as many bombs as we do. Like, it's weird how so many movies come out, and you think, like, how did a studio unleash that, like, knowingly? And that's the next movie we're going to talk about, is one of those. But the fact, it does feel like there was something that they really, truly wanted to please by going back. Like, it's my understanding they actually brought in, like, a real fan of Sonic in general to kind of fix the design and put it to where it needed to be. So, yeah, I do think it came together nicely, and that was definitely a much better call to make. Definitely gave the movie a really good reputation prior to its release, and to see that sort of you feel like, and that's another thing where you can see them devoting to ideas that maybe aren't ideas they should be devoted to, is it doesn't feel like you really hear stories like this often or at all where a movie's first advertisement comes out and gets the reaction that it did, and now the movie's reputation is where it is now, and the fact that it was able to bounce back that far by saying, all right, we'll do something about this. We'll delay the release as far as we need to, and then we'll go from there. And yeah, so good on them that it ended up working out after they made that decision, regardless. Like I said, you can be cynical and say it was so they wouldn't lose money. Like I said, I think sometimes they don't care. But, yeah, so when you take that into consideration, it is going to do wonders for the movie's reputation as a whole, even if there's still a lot going on in the movie that doesn't really work. But then you've got the stuff with Carrie that, like, balances that out. Because I don't recall... Maybe there's one or two things with Carrie that don't land, but given how much he's doing in the movie, those are pretty much inconsequential. So those moments that don't land. I don't even remember what those could have been, but I feel like they may have been in there, but in the long run, it doesn't really matter because it works as a whole. So, yeah, it's certainly fine, and that was definitely a close call on everybody's part in regards to the making of it. So there that is. So let's go into Fantasy Island. The new Blumhouse movie where once again they make something for like in like the 1-digit millions of budget. I think it was like 7 million. And regardless of how bad the movie is, they're gonna profit no matter what because the genre will. Well, the genre they're playing it up as will sell itself. So that's how they're gonna make their money. But I don't know if they had an actual genre in mind when they were writing it. I have no idea what the hell is going on. Because, once again, kind of like Sonic, there's a tiny bit of history. When me and my brother were younger, there was the channel that played like the older shows, and Fantasy Island was one of those shows, and I remember that we watched it all the time. But the only thing I remember is the opening. So, I don't remember jack shit about the show itself. Not even one detail of one episode. I only remember the opening. So, that's all I really had to go on. I couldn't even remember what the show was about until I refreshed my memory. But as a kid, I may not have even known what it was about. But they decided to give it a horror angle. Once again, supposedly, I think, but because the way this is being played up was, you can, I guess the kiss of death is going to be when Blumhouse puts their name on the title, like Blumhouse's Truth or Dare, and now this is apparently officially Blumhouse's Fantasy Island, you know, to differentiate the two, in case you confuse this, whatever the hell this is, with an old TV show from whatever decade that was. I want to say 70s or early 80s or something, but that's a guess. So, and I had heard comparisons where some people were using this almost as a positive, said, if you were into Truth or Dare, you'll be into this. Well, fuck. That's going to be a problem. And the worst problem here is that this idea, you know, taking this idea and converting it into a horror movie, it definitely could have worked. Like, this concept really could have worked. But it's like whoever made this was hell-bent on doing everything in their power to make sure that it didn't work. And this is what we ended up with. So, we start off and we get one of the only familiar things to me about the show, which was they're coming in on the plane, and you have a character that says, the plane, only she says it all majestic and shit. The end. And then they come in, and it's the whole thing of Michael Pena comes in, and he's like, we can turn your fantasies into reality, but you only get one go at it, and you must see it all the way through. And it's like, that should have been a clue right away. I think a character even says that at one point. Where it's like, they're all building it up like, oh, wow, this is going to be, you know, the stuff that dreams are made of. It's going to be like Westworld, only even better. It's going to be amazing. But it's like, the way he says, you must see your fantasy through all the way, like, to the end. And nobody was like, what in the fuck does that mean? So, but they run with it because they're idiotic characters in an idiotic movie that looks like it was made for the fucking CW or something. So, talking about horror movies also, we've gone through the cliches over and over and over again in the last almost 7 years we've been doing these videos. And the one horror cliche I feel like I bring up the most is the spontaneous nosebleed, which usually means nothing. It's just there to be there. And I am not even kidding. We get the spontaneous nosebleed in this movie before the beginning credits are over. So, all these promising things happening all at once. Spontaneous nosebleed horror cliche before the opening credits are over. A reference to the TV show that the audience this movie was made for will never know existed. And it's being compared. If you liked Truth or Dare from a couple years ago, this is for you. And it's like, how many things can stack against one movie before its beginning credits are over? But yeah, then we go into the whole thing of everything starts off great, and then, oh, not so much. They're doing like a monkey's paw thing, I guess. But the trouble is the kind of, like, the tone shifts here. If there's not even a tone at all. Like, I would say tone shifts, like, that would imply they're doing one thing, then they do something totally different, and then they go back or whatever. But it's like every new scene has a different tone, and none of them work. None of them line up. None of them even work in their own scenes. It's like the one scene will start off one way, and by the time that scene is over, they don't even know where the hell they are. So the problem also was the progression, though. Was you got the Maggie Q character, and she's like, oh, well, I rejected a marriage proposal or something, and now everything, butterfly affected into horribleness or whatever. So Michael Pena's like, well, you're going to get to go back and you're going to get to accept that proposal and then see where it goes from there. And then it's like, alright. And then we just kind of go on that for a while. Like, she just hangs out with the dude. They go to dinner. They end up in bed. All that. Then we go into this other guy who's in the, who has this thing where he became a cop, but he wanted to, go into the military like his dad, because his dad died a hero and all that. But he didn't make it for one reason or another. I don't even remember now. Or he chickened out or something. I don't remember. But then eventually that turns into something that kind of progresses naturally. Then you've got the Lucy Hale thing going on, and this is the turning point where we realize, oh, no, this is, like, really fucked up. Because she wants to get revenge on a childhood bully, and the childhood bully is physically there, being tortured in a hostile-esque situation. At least as hostile-esque as a PG-13 movie can go, which isn't very far. But when she figures that out, it's like, oh my god, this place is sinister. They actually kidnapped her. She's actually here. They're actually torturing her. Holy shit. This is like, this whole island is all sinister and fucked up. But here's the problem with the tonal shifts, is the Lucy Hale thing comes before the military guy. So it's like, you got Maggie Q doing her thing, and it's like, oh, there's nothing wrong here. And then you got Lucy Hale, and it's like, oh, there's something definitely wrong here. And then we go to the military guy that's kind of on the Maggie Q level of, oh, nothing's wrong yet. But we know now, you already showed us, you showed your hand, but you're still trying to play up like this place isn't sinister. It's like, I feel like those storylines were put in out of order. And that's how we start off. And we've got two comedy relief guys. Comedy relief, of course, is a term I use generously in this regard. And then that's basically all it is. But then we just jump around between these four people. There might have been another character I'm not remembering right away. But it doesn't matter. That's how much it matters. We got Michael Rooker hanging out in the bushes. With like a machete or something. And you can tell right away by the first... He doesn't even say anything. You just tell by his first shot, he's the guy that knows everything. And he's here to warn everybody or something. He's got a plan that he didn't seem to think through very well. It's like, here, take this thing, and then take it to, back to America so everybody knows what's up with this place. and it doesn't. There's no plan of what do you do with that thing when you get back. What do you tell people? How will they believe you? Who are you going to have examine this thing, and will that even... I don't know. And that, like I said, that's basically what it is it's jumping around like that. But then, when you get to stuff like, the comedy relief guys, they suddenly have something going on where Kim Coates and a bunch of guys come in purge masks, because they're just gonna rip themselves off now. It's like, forget Eli Roth and all those other things. Forget even the TV show you're based on. We're just gonna start ripping ourselves off now and put everybody in purge masks and do pretty much exactly what the Purge did. Where it's like you play it up as a horror movie, you build it up like it's gonna be this really scary thing, and then really it's just an action movie. There's like really no horror here. Really at all. There's like, I don't know, monsters of some kind of lurking, but they might not even be there. I don't know. But then you've got stuff that just doesn't work, like when Lucy Hale comes to the conclusion that her childhood bully is actually real, and her actual delivery of the line is, I said I wanted, to torture my childhood bully. I didn't think you'd actually do it. That's pretty much the way she sees her childhood bully being tortured actually, and she's realizing, oh man, this whole place is sinister, and that is her delivery is, well, I didn't think you'd actually do it. I feel like there should have been a bit more like of a frantic nature in that. I don't know, but then after she rescues her and they're wandering through the jungle, before or after they find Michael Rooker, I don't even remember now. It's before they find Michael Rooker, before they run into him. It turns into a comedy. It's an actual legit comedy, where in genre, not in like practice, where she's trying to play up that Lucy Hale's trying to play up that she also was kidnapped and put on this island, and it's like, oh no, I have no idea who was torturing you. But you can tell they're playing it for comedy, like intentionally. But it's, I mean, good on them for the comedy being intentional for once in this movie, but it's so out of place. Okay, actually, is it out of place, though? I don't even know anymore, because this movie is a different genre every fucking turn it makes. Every new cut is a new genre, pretty much. So, maybe it fits in with being all over the place, but I'm not trying to say that's a compliment, really, at all. So, and to go on that further, the whole military thing, where the dude's fantasy ends up being that he's actually, like, on, the battlefield with his dad. Like, he has to convince his dad that he's the older him, because when his dad died, he was just a child. But it's like this whole dad reunion scene is like a full-on, like, trying to be serious and dramatic scene. There is nothing in this fucking thing that matches. And the problem with that, too, is I feel like this dad scene would be a genuine scene if it didn't have all this other shit around it and you were so confused by this point as to what the hell the makers of this movie were trying to even do. Or, like I said, even, you could almost fix this tone-wise. The movie is fucked, no matter what. But you could almost fix this tone-wise if you just put the scenes in a different order. I don't know what the random fucking shuffle this was in the editing software, but but there it is. And, I mean, they do, as far as it not really being, of all the genres it's trying to do, going on the fact that none of them seem to be horror, despite the fact that that's the angle they seemingly wanted to start with, there are, like, scares in it. Those are really big quotes around scares. But it kind of feels like the scares were added in post-production. Like, they almost don't even feel like they're connected to what's in the scene around them. It's just like, oh, let's put a dude's scary face in the darkness here. But then when the character looks back, it's not there. And those are the scares. It's the same one every time. Oh, is that a face in the dark? I guess not. Moving on. That's that's the horror angle of the movie. Everything else is either an action movie, or trying to be a comedy, or trying to be super super dramatic, trying to be profound, trying to be cathartic, and just like none of it's landing. They're trying everything. God bless them, I guess. They're trying fucking everything, and just none of it's landing at all. And I don't know. I really don't know. And of course, with all this in mind, you can imagine it's terribly paced. I felt like I looked at my watch a lot more than usual, and it's just like time was going so slowly when it felt like so much had fucking happened, and there was still like an hour left. And then eventually, of course, we get to an ending where it's like they're basically just trying to do as many twists as possible. And that's all the ending is. Like the entire last 20 minutes or so, it's just, like 20 or 25 minutes is just 20 to 25 minutes of unceremonious reveals. Where it's like, and the thing is that everything is portrayed so poorly up to this point. It's like, when we get an unceremonious reveal, a part of your brain should be saying, that was so unceremonious, that's not the actual reveal. Um, but the thing is that the execution of everything else in the movie is so incredibly bad that when you get those unceremonious reveals that may or may not be hiding something else, you're just willing to take them at face value and say, yeah, this movie would reveal that thing as unceremoniously as they did just now. But then every time there's a new reveal, it's like, there's no... They try so many different twists and turns and reveals, and none of them are the one that makes you go, oh, okay, they were onto something this whole time. Not really. So, this is... And it's just this barrage of dumb ideas all the way to the end, and then it's like... This is the kind of stuff where you think about the movies that don't get made. And you see the stuff that comes out at, like, Sundance or whatever, and these people that make these little modest movies that end up really breaking out, like the Moonlights of the world, and people say, like, God, it took me so long to get this made. It took me so long to get the minuscule budget that I needed to get this thing made. This is like 20 years in the making, this little thing, and it's something amazing. And then it's like insulting when stuff like this somehow makes it out there. And it's also frustrating, because you think about this with Truth or Dare also, it's also frustrating coming from a place like Blumhouse, because you know what they're capable of. They can do this, little low-budget thing, like, under 10 million, and have an outcome like this, or like Truth or Dare. And I stand by, I don't like the Happy Death Day movies. I know a lot of people do, but I just can't fucking stand them. And then, they make Get Out, and they get a Best Picture nomination, and... It's like, we know what they're capable of, but it's like... I did see somebody talking about how, like, yeah, you can hire, like, a Peel or somebody like that. But then you can also hire, like, a Jeff Wadlow, who did this movie. And it's like, hiring directors like that don't know what the fuck they're doing, and have shown before they don't know what the fuck they're doing, make that budget as low as it is. Where it's like, with Get Out being Peele's debut movie, it's like, yeah, they probably didn't pay him a shitload, but then it's like, once Get Out happened, something tells me that's not the same thing with Peele anymore. So it's like, oh, we gotta bring a Jeff Waldo in here, we gotta make some money so that we can make more, Get Outs and stuff like that. So, I guess. So, I mean, to be fair, it does feel like there's more positivity around their name than there is stuff like Truth or Dare in this. So, here's that whole thing. I guess everybody has their ups and downs, but do your downs have to be that fucking low, for God's sake? I was giving this... when I came out of Fantasy Island, it was like, I get it. I feel like there was something in there, but I mean, when you really dissect it, it just becomes more insulting the more you look at it and think about it, so... There that is. So, the third movie is going to be The Photograph, which is the theatrically released romance movie that came out on Valentine's Day. And it sets up, like, there's something about this movie that feels unique, but story wise, it's really not at all. So there's an interesting sort of contrast here. So we have Lakeith Stanfield and Issa Rae, and they have really incredible chemistry. I'm still not quite sure how I feel about Issa Rae. There's still something about her that I don't find as compelling as I feel like I probably should, given that she's been a there's I think because there's a lot of stuff of hers I still haven't seen, then the stuff I have seen feels very underwhelming. It's like I hear really good things about this actress, but from what I've seen, it's like I don't know that I get it. But there's still like isn't I want to say Insecure is what she was on, and which I heard amazing things about that I never got around to. But in the meantime, the stuff I have seen, it's kind of felt somewhat one note. But what Lakeith Stanfield is doing here, and the two of them together, do make something that really works as far as watching them on screen. And when I say unique, it's like there's something a bit more sort of held back about it as far as romance movies go, where there's not a lot of like convoluted stuff, there's not a lot of forced conflicts. Like it's really well shot, and there's like a jazz score that works really well. And it's like as far as aesthetically, everything feels like this is something kind of new that we don't really it's a style we don't really see in this genre very often, if at all. But when you look at it from a story standpoint, I know this is kind of like an extreme example, but it almost feels Nicholas Sparks like, minus, like I said, the forced stuff in that. That's like the forced heartstring pulling. That's not in here really at all. There is some heartstring pulling here and there, but it's never like really. It's not like they're begging you to do it. They just kind of gradually sort of get to that point at times. But there is something going on here that we've seen a lot before, and that's the parallel story, where we have the Lakeith Stanfield and Issa Rae's story, and then we have the story of her mom and what was going on with her, and then her own story, which is something that Stanfield's character is writing a story about or something. It's kind of vague on what exactly he's doing, but or what exactly his job is, I guess. But in the parallel story thing, I think usually falls into the whole thing of one of them works and one of them doesn't work as well. Like one of them is stronger than the other, and that's where the imbalance is. But interestingly enough, I did think that they played pretty, maybe not necessarily cohesively, like, because usually when you're doing the parallel story thing, there's a reason, and it's the whole thing of this thing kind of mirrors this thing, but it's not too overbearing about it, and then you kind of feel that connection. It's almost like the stories are melding, and then we get this one full product. The two stories do feel pretty distant for the most part, but the thing is that quality-wise, they're pretty on par with each other. Where it's like I can see people watching this and saying like, I preferred the Stanfield and Ray scenes, or I prefer the flashback scenes. But I thought they were on par enough to where they pretty much were at their peaks at the same time, and they were kind of in their slumps at the same time. So there was like I almost want to commend it, even though there were slumps in it. And there are many times in the movie where it kind of just feels like dead air. But yeah, but to their credit, another thing that I did find refreshing was how straightforward it is. Because, like I was talking about with, convoluted plot points and forced conflicts and stuff like that, you you just kind of expect that with the romance genre at this point. Even the most well-regarded ones end up falling in those territories where there's got to be some sort of problem or some sort of conflict or whatever. But this is the kind of movie where when a conflict does arrive, like when Stanfield's ex-girlfriend gets brought up that she didn't know about, that's a very, very, very recent ex-girlfriend, in a worse movie, that would be the conflict till the fucking end. And in the next scene, they just take a walk and they talk about it, and that's pretty much the end of it. And it's like that's so anything like that is going to be really refreshing, and just really even in like their first date scene, it just kind of feels like they're having real conversations. Like, it doesn't feel like movie dialogue, and it doesn't feel like they're trying too hard to be like clever or well written or anything like that. It's you don't hear a screenwriter screaming, "Listen to how much of a wordsmith I am," or anything like that. And that works really well. So they're just talking about like current musicians, and that's it. And then we just kind of gradually get to there, and there's no like sort of like dissolve or cut to show like a passage of time. Like, it starts with them just casually talking about current musicians, and this conversation eventually finds its way to their first kiss. And the great thing about this also is that their first kiss is like nothing overly dramatic at all. And it's like they just kind of talk about like, are we going in for it? Is it too soon? And then it just happens. And not only is it just natural, and they don't play it too overly dramatic, but it actually kind of, the scene has a punchline of all things, that actually does make it work and actually makes them feel like real. The chemistry between them feels so authentic, which is going to be obviously what keeps this movie afloat. That and the interaction with other family members. He has a brother, I believe, that's played by Laura Howery, and Laura Howery is one of those people where he was in Get Out, obviously, and he was the breakout comedic character, and of course, whenever that happens, you have to see that person in every comedy or every comedic side role for the rest of time, is how it works. And I feel like he's on the verge of being that overused type, where it's like they're trying to put them in everything in sort of similar roles every time. But I still feel like he hasn't like worn out his welcome yet. He's still when you see him, your first thought is, oh, they put him in something else playing a very similar character again. Okay, but then when he starts to do his thing, you're like, yeah, that's why, because he can still make that work. He can take this character that's a very obvious type for this kind of movie and still make him an entertaining and memorable character. And the scenes with him work because of this. And that's like the moment where the scene where there's a storm and they have to go stay at his house. And it's just basically just the four of them just bullshitting in the living room. Just really works. So because all the back and forth between them just works. So eventually we do get to the sort of last third or so of the movie where they made an interesting choice. And it's so interesting that I wish I liked it more than I did, as far as like the execution of it, I guess. Where it's like after a while, it started to feel like the dialogue just kind of subsided. And there was like fewer and fewer scenes of dialogue and just them kind of being in the moment. And it's like when you hear that, you think that's like, it is really admirable to go that route, and there's so much you can sort of do with that, especially with Stanfield being kind of a subtly physical actor. Like, not necessarily the way you think when you think of like physical actors, but there's like, as far as like in a role like this, he's like perfect for it because there's so much he can do without speaking, whether it be his eyes or his movement or whatever, or just the way he looks at her. But eventually this goes on long enough that, like I said, it kind of just feels like it starts to turn into dead air, and there's like an emptiness after a while, and then it just kind of feels anticlimactic when it just kind of stops. And I get it. It's kind of hard to criticize a movie for being anticlimactic when you're praising it for not being overly dramatic. It's a hard thing to gauge, but yeah. But like I said, it is really well shot. Like the technical aspects are nice, but the thing is you can't tell for sure if it's a compliment or a criticism to say that those things hide the cliches well. Because it's like, they hide the cliches well, that's the compliment. The cliches are there, that's the criticism. So, and for a story like this that's doing so many fresh things, for there to still feel like there's a familiarity. Like, saying cliche is a strong word in a movie like this, but it's a familiarity. So the kind of starts to weigh down a little bit on the positives and the stuff that felt more fresh going in. So, but I mean, it's fine. Like I said, it is refreshing to see a movie like this in this genre. Try those things out, but I don't think it quite reaches that level that it could have. But the fact that it's close enough that it's admirable regardless. So there is that. Let's go into animated territory, where we have the Shaun the Sheep sequel, which is called Farmageddon, which is amazing. As soon as I saw that title, it's like, that's exactly what I would expect a sequel to the Shaun the Sheep movie to be called. So I have praised the first Shaun the Sheep movie endlessly since it came out in 2015. I wasn't extremely familiar with the whole Shaun the Sheep thing until I saw the movie, and I remember being blown away by the whole no dialogue thing, which they do keep up here as well. There's some words that slip in and out, but they're more or less mumbled, or they're barely words. But the thing about this story-wise is that, well, this one does feel a bit more like there's like an end goal to this one, whereas the first one kind of had this sort of nice flow to it where it kind of just seemed to go from sequence to sequence. But they did that in a way that made it really work. But and it really lent itself to the whole no dialogue thing, just being the events and the actions as it went on, and the animation spoke for itself. But this one tries to be more of a story thing, and I think that's kind of what holds it back when you try to use that approach again, or try to use that approach in general that it is, on this thing that has like a full story going on. But at the same time, it is pretty easy to tell this story at this point, because it's a story that's been told a billion times before. It's like, have you ever been watching E.T., and you're like, I like Henry Thomas and everything, but you know what would be even better than Henry Thomas in this story? If he was Shaun the Sheep. And that's basically what this movie is. There's like constant callbacks to other sci-fi movies and Spielberg movies and stuff like that. And, of course, it starts with the crash landing of an adorable alien. And I say adorable because that's literally how the Netflix description describes it. And it lands in the barn, and once again, the farmer's totally oblivious to everything going on. As far as the actual alien being there, he's aware that there is some sort of what he thinks to be an invasion, and the town thinks is an invasion. And so you got this whole background thing with the farmer taking full advantage of this, trying to rake in money with making it starts off with a Farmageddon theme park, and then that turns into a Farmageddon play he's written a script for that he's going to perform by himself as a one-man show. And that's just background stuff. The foreground stuff is the alien being an alien, and Shaun and everybody trying to keep it in line while hoping that its parents come back. And of course, there's going to be the big, government people coming for it. And with this alien being the type of, adorable character that it is, as they describe it, I mean that does work. Like, you'd have to be soulless to not agree. But at the same time, it's like, when you compare it to the first movie, it does feel like this one is going a lot more in, like, the cutesy territory, like where the first movie felt extremely universal in regards to, like, its humor and its style and all that. This one feels significantly more, like, child-friendly and kid-aimed. Like I said, it's hard to criticize a movie called Shaun the Sheep for being kid-friendly. But like I said, I feel like it leans much more in that direction rather than being a sort of the universal thing that the first movie felt more like. But there's still stuff in there, like I said, especially for the sci-fi people. A lot of it's blatantly obvious, some of it's a bit more subtle, but most of it's blatantly obvious. I think my personal favorite was the 2001 theme plays, and it's like, of course, the 2001 theme plays, but then it's burnt toast that's shot, that, like, the angle of it makes it look like the monolith, so that's... and the jokes like that do work, and there's stuff, sprinkled around in, like, the background or in the details, like the newspaper is called Echo, and then next to it in smaller lettering it says Echo 2 more times. Just visuals like that. Then, like I said, more obvious stuff like Roswell jelly is what the farmer uses. All those references to the sci-fi movies just over and over and over again. I think there was a Close Encounters thing in there. 2001 came back a few times, and there's a lot of that. Like, it did feel a bit like a crutch a little bit. But this is a movie that still always manages to find the humor in some sort of joke, whether it be, a visual gag or whatever, or something a bit more childlike, like a prolonged burp joke. But but still, there is something here. Like this, the charm that we got from the concept the first time around is still here in many cases. And another thing that's kind of commendable about it is talking about like the government people coming in, where it's like the story is so cliche it almost made me forget that it was a Shaun the Sheep movie, because there's the woman that comes in and she's obviously like, the head person or whatever that's looking for him, or the alien, which I think is supposed to be a girl, but I'm not entirely sure. But they she comes in and it's like, oh, is this going to be some Sarah Paulson type character or whatever? And it's like, whose voice is going to come out of this person? Kate Blanchett, somebody like that. And then it's like, oh yes, I forgot. There is no dialogue. The character does not have to be attached to a celebrity or their voice. They can just be the character. In an animated movie, that's really nice to see. And it feels really, like, fresh. So it does have that. But in the long run, as charming as it can be, and as funny as it can be, and as much you're rooting for this movie in general, this one does kind of feel like a prolonged short. Like, this feels like it could have been like a 15 or 20 minute short. But it's... Yeah, so they kind of stretch it out with the redundant gags that go back to other sci-fi movies. But what we love about the whole Shaun the Sheep thing is still here, and what we love about Aardman is still here. It's all still here, but there's just a lot more holding this one down than in, say, like the first one or other Aardman movies. So, yeah, so it's fine, but it's kind of a step down, which I believe I was kind of warned about going in, so it happens, but it's still perfectly fine. So let's end on To All the Boys, and there's a subtitle. I don't remember what it is. To All the Boys 2 is what I wrote at the top of this, which obviously is the sequel to the Netflix romantic comedy that came out, was it last year or a couple of years ago? To All the Boys I Loved Before, I think it's called. People really, really loved that thing. And I remember, like, that was the reason I watched it, was I had heard so many positive things about it. But then that was before we could really trust Netflix as far as doing original movies. I don't know that we still can entirely, but they certainly have a much better reputation for original movies now than they did a couple of years ago. And despite the fact that everybody loved this thing, I just really didn't. It was a sledgehammer to the head of cliches over and over and over again. It was the lead character making all these poor decisions, doing all these overly elaborate things to problems that could be solved significantly easier, trying to decide between two dudes that look exactly alike. There is... And I couldn't find any of the appeal in that thing, but of course they want to... I just recently learned, apparently this is a series of books, and that's why we have more than one. The third one has already been filmed, and I think also comes out this year. So, yeah, and we'll get into the idea of that in a second, but going into this, I really didn't even remember anything about the first movie. But thankfully, Netflix put a recap that's about 2 minutes long of the first movie. And it's like, oh, thank God. I genuinely need this. And then when I saw that 2 minutes, it was like, it all came back to me. Of all the flaws and everything. And so then it goes on its way. It starts off with the opening to Adventures in Babysitting that she's recreating. And it's like, well, that's always a good sign. I mean, on the one hand, it's like, oh, you're so out of ideas. Your opening scene is reenacting the opening scene of another movie. And I went on a whole thing about how original Netflix movies are terrible about relying so much on referencing other movies. Like, when you really look at it and you watch those other movies, like, really, next time you watch an original Netflix movie that's a comedy like this, kind of keep in mind how many fucking references to other movies they make. It's like half the goddamn dialogue. And it's a continuous thing through all of them. And sure enough, they reenact the whole opening to Adventures in Babysitting, which is hard to criticize because it's Adventures in Babysitting. I mean, it's to throw them a reference, it's like, fine, I can forgive you. And of course, it turns out because as it's opening, it's like, this is the Adventures in Babysitting opening, and it's like, I get the reference. But then it's like, I know these movies too well. Somebody's going to blatantly say and choreograph for the audience, did you know that this is a reference to the movie Adventures in Babysitting that came out in 1987? Chris Columbus, made it and everything. And it's like they just really, but it's her, she's watching it on Netflix and doing this at the same time, and the sister pauses it and says, you're watching Adventures in Babysitting again, aren't you? And it's like, have fun having Adventures in Babysitting Netflix. You only have it for one more year before Disney Plus gets it. But here, we have another conflict where we went through, and I guess the concept lends itself to other movies because of the whole thing where she sent out the letters, and there are some that weren't returned, and now one has been returned, and it's a kid that she had a crush on, like, all this time. So now she's got to decide, I've got, Peter, I think is his name. The guy that she went through the whole thing with in the first movie, and it's like, now they're together, and now there's a conflict because another guy's involved, and she's like, oh no, did I pick the right one? Is this really what fate wanted? And then it's like, I don't really remember the kind of person Pete was in the first movie, but here he's obviously some sort of buffoon. And the movie wants us to know this because they go on their first date. And honestly, I can't even tell for sure what they're trying to pull off here, because I'm pretty sure we're supposed to think Peter's super, super likable, super, super lovable, and we love him as much as she does and all that shit. So when they go on their date, it's her first date ever, and he charms her by throwing his fork on the floor. And it's like, these movies are terrible to the point that I can't tell if we're supposed to... This is going to be the point where they're downplaying him to make it more of a conflict when she starts seeing the other guy, or if it's like, we're genuinely supposed to find that charming. And the way this date goes the rest of the time, I think we're supposed to find the fact that he throws his fork on the floor charming and funny or something. I don't know. Fuck it. Look at this thing. I don't give a shit. But the problem, though, is that when she does start seeing this other guy, seeing him, like, around, is of course what I mean, because she's dating Peter. But the thing is... Yeah, we do run into that conflict where the guy is, like, actually charming. And so it's like, who is she going to choose? The guy that she did all that shit for in the first movie? Or this new guy who's significantly more charming and she has a shitload more chemistry with? We get into all those territories where we're boxed into a corner, and she's like, I need to tell... This dude doesn't know that I'm dating Peter right now. And they used to be, like, friends and everything, and I feel like there's a connection here, so I should probably tell this dude. I should either break it off with Peter, or I should tell this dude, and I'm deciding to make the decision to tell this dude. So, she's like, I have something to tell you, and then they get cut off, of course. So, when they're no longer cut off, when somebody walks in, interrupts them, and then leaves, she doesn't say, so anyway, that really important thing I was getting ready to tell you... And I get trying to muster up the courage to do that, and how that vibe can maybe break, and maybe the courage isn't there now because the mood's been broken or whatever. But it feels incredibly convoluted, especially in the next scene when she tries again. So, what we have in this scenario is she's like, I need to tell you something. Interrupted, and then the scene continues after they're not interrupted, and she doesn't fucking say it. So then they're like, alright, let's go into this room now. Now that they're in this new room, she's like, alright, this is it. Alright, I have to tell you something. He's like, alright. No more interruptions. Just the, I wanted to tell you, proceeds to say something she was not just about to tell him. And it's stuff like this that drags the movie out and makes it dull as fuck. and makes you not give a shit about anything. It doesn't matter if he finds out. It doesn't matter if she confesses. Because it's gonna make lazy decisions and go in those cliche directions. No matter what happens, no matter what she says to him, the outcome is gonna be something we have seen a billion times before, that this has nothing new to add to. So we're just going through the motions, and that's because this has already set itself up to be a middle movie. We already know a third one has been made, and it's like, so we already go into this one thinking about the fact that this is going to be an incomplete movie, regardless of how it ends, because it's not done anyway. So, and that can be a problem for a lot of, like, you know, if you have a trilogy of movies and you have that one in the middle, but it's like, there is, that's the problem, though, is it does have an ending, but then we know already that there's going to be the brand new conflict, probably very similar to this one, in that, I don't know. But, so, they introduce, I think, is a new character, Trevor, and Trevor is here to basically speak in dialogue that feels like dated slang already, and that's just his reason for existing. And because we need other characters. We need more pointless dialogue to drag the scenes out. For more people to be here to drag out the conflicts, because it's like, oh, we'll do this thing together, but then this person shows up, then this person shows up, then this person, and it just keeps going. And worth noting, the movie Everything, Everything, which was also terrible, has made 2 comebacks in like the past 20 minutes or so. Because this movie is from the writer of Everything, Everything, and the director of Everything, Everything did The Photograph. So I don't know what this comeback is for the people that made Everything, Everything, but they don't deserve it. So it's, regardless of what I said about the direction of The Photograph, but regardless. So, interestingly enough, despite all this convoluted bullshit, and despite all the characters doing stupid things, and this just being not emotionally attached to this in any way whatsoever, I don't think it's an objectively bad movie. Like, it's not poorly made. Like, there's some visual ideas in there. And it's like the scenes where she's making food are nice by themselves as standalone things. There's scene transitions that work well. But, I mean, it does all this bullshit, and then at the end just pretty much ends up exactly back where it started, just for us to know we're going to be going into another movie. Like, it doesn't even set up a third movie. But we already know it's already been made, and it's on its way. And we just go, the whole thing, when you look at the beginning versus the end, we just went in a fucking circle. And it's like everything that happened, and she tries to justify this. She's like narrating and saying all the stuff we've been through together has led us here. It's like, yes, right back where you fucking started. So that's what I wanted to point out about when you look at the idea of a romantic comedy having a sequel, let alone a trilogy. Let's just talk about the fact of a romantic comedy having a sequel. It's just an idea that inherently doesn't work because of the formula of romantic comedy, regardless of if you're doing something different or if you're not. There's still a formula there in the romantic comedy. And it's like, you do the thing, you have the convoluted scenarios, you have the forced conflicts, and then you end up together, usually, more often than not. And of course this was a case where they did end up together. So it's like, if you were to do a real-life sequel to a romantic comedy, that would probably not be a happy movie. Especially with the way people get together in romantic comedies, is generally in probably not very healthy ways. So, and you could say that about this, too. So, and like I said, the fact that they want to do this again, I would say I don't know what they have in store for a third movie, but judging by this one, I'm going to assume it is exactly more of the same. So, I don't even know why I dragged this out for so long. I don't know why I'm still talking about this, or why we're even still here, so we're just going to end this here. There is a Versus that was out either before or after this. I don't know. And then next week we have the Harrison Ford movie, and I think is it Dee Reese, I think, has a new Netflix movie. So many directors, from David Fincher to Spike Lee to Peter Berg, all have Netflix movies coming this year. So hopefully they liven up the proceedings, and we get less shit like this. So we'll see what happens with all that and whatever else comes out. So until all that, I think that's it for this.